Welcome to Human School. I'm Dr. Patil Armenian, and each episode I'll share some of my personal stories, interview inspiring people, and offer tools to help you with the mission of being a human on Earth. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Human School. Today on the podcast, we have one of my very good friends, Dr. Gayle Kouklis. Hi, Gayle.
Yeah.
So Gayle not only is an emergency physician that works in private practice in Seattle, but of course she did her residency at the best program in the country, UCSF Fresno, and she did a fellowship in climate medicine. So today I'm going to pick her brain about everything climate medicine related because honestly, it's a topic that I don't really know a lot about. So I'm excited to learn about it. So tell us, Gayle, first, how did you become an expert in climate medicine and what is that?
So thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here. I think my initial interest in climate medicine started toward the end of med school, kind of coming from wilderness medicine and kind of thinking about how the environment and human health interacts. Through residency, I did some work in Fresno looking at extreme heat and air quality and how that impacts the health of the people in Fresno County. And from there, was looking to understand things a little bit better and gain some extra skills. So I did this fellowship at University of Colorado for climate change and health science policy. It's a mouthful. I think they finally changed the title of the fellowship because 10 words is too long for the name of a fellowship. And through the fellowship, I worked with FEMA up here in Washington, Oregon, and Alaska, and also the Environmental Defense Fund and some folks over at Cornell, and mostly focused on extreme heat. Being from California, heat is kind of the crux of climate change that we see there. And we see this throughout the entire world at this point, where we are seeing hotter weather, hotter summers, heat extending further into like earlier in the year and later in the year, and kind of completely changing our relationship with temperature and how that impacts people. So climate medicine broadly, I think of it in kind of three different buckets. So there's the research bucket, which is, I think, self-explanatory. It's the understanding of how humans and their climate interact. It can be granular. It can be looking at pathophysiology and how changes in environment impact things like particulate matter in the lungs. But it can also be population level science. So looking at trends in strokes and heart attacks, infections, and death change with different climatologic events like heat waves, flooding, or other extreme weather. The next bucket is, I think of it in two parts. So this is advocacy. So this is going to be community-based advocacy, which looks into grassroots organizing, human connection, mutual aid, education. And for me, it's really kind of the foundation of resilience and a response to extreme events. This can look at like collaboration between public health departments, hospital systems, community-based organizations, and many other climate-focused organizations. Then the other side of this is going to be legislative advocacy, which we'll talk more about later, but that's really just, local, state, and federal level legislation focused on mitigation, which is decreasing emissions and building community infrastructure and resilience. And then within climate medicine, the third bucket is healthcare sustainability. This decreases the carbon footprint of the healthcare system. So the US healthcare system is a horrible emitter. The US healthcare system accounts for 8.5% of the US carbon emissions overall. And the US healthcare system makes up 25% of global healthcare emissions. The next two highest emitters after the US healthcare systems are the EU and China. And per person, the US healthcare system makes 3 times as many carbon emissions per person as the EU and 6 times as much as China. So it's a huge carbon emitter, and we really need to focus on ways to decrease that because we're trying to fix the problems that are happening with climate change and human health, but we're also a huge contributor to those problems.
I didn't realize that we also contribute to the problems. So is that just like resource utilization and the buildings themselves, or what does that mean?
It's a lot. So there's a lot of of unseen contributions. So obviously things like energy usage within a hospital, but then you also have to look at nursing facilities and long-term care facilities and rehab facilities. So it's this really huge, really broad group of buildings, and then transportation. So ambulances, patient transportation, transportation of people getting to work to go work at these places, pharmacologic development, so designing new
Mhm.
drugs, and then the medication waste. And then also just trash, right? Like if you think about your day at work, like how often are you using disposable things versus things that we can actually autoclave and reuse? And there's the biohazard side of that, which has a much higher carbon footprint just because it's all incinerated versus kind of plastic and that sort of stuff.
So what I'm hearing is the hospital does not have to be like 50 degrees all the time. Can we stop using like so much AC where everyone's walking around wearing 2 jackets at all times?
Probably we're not wearing sweaters to work.
I can't even work a shift if I don't have like a fleece jacket on. So, I mean, that has to be contributing to the environment
Yeah. And
negatively.
then they're like, "Oh, wait, the trauma bay has to be 85 degrees, but, like, every room around the trauma bay has to be 50." Like, what are we doing?
Come on, I'm hearing a lot of like, let's just be logical here.
Yeah, yeah, and the good news is, like, a lot of these things that we can do to improve sustainability within a healthcare system are actually cost saving. If you're kind of the upfront costs are higher, but, for example, like a laryngoscope, if you're using a disposable blade versus a reusable blade, the lifetime of that reusable blade has such lower carbon and cost, like actual monetary cost for the healthcare system than a disposable one. And like the disposable ones, yeah, they're nice and easy to use, and you don't have to think about like processing them. But in the long term, like these are things that we have to be thinking about.
Definitely. Now, what are some recent examples where real humans have been impacted by the climate and environment itself?
So we just got a heat warning issued for Seattle. It's 85 degrees here. Okay, girl. Like this is now what we call a heat warning.
Okay, it's 105
Oh,
here, but 85 is
yeah,
very hot for Seattle.
it is. Yeah. And it's also like we don't have AC here, right? Historically, no one has really needed AC. And so, like, thinking about this current heat warning, the heat dome that was in the Pacific Northwest a few years ago, in Washington state alone, over those 6 days, there was an excess 441 deaths. And that's just above our baseline mortality rate in the state. So it's like 73 people died every single day for 6 days straight, above our average. Of those, 28% of people never actually were able to call 911 because they died too soon. And of the ones who actually called 911, almost 85% died before ambulances got to their house. And so we're looking at these huge gaps in preparation or huge gaps in infrastructure. So even just like the ability to put air conditioning in homes and ensure that they're safe for people to be in. And then the hospitals got completely overwhelmed. I remember I was talking to Arun, who used to work at UCSF Fresno, and he was working at one of the hospitals up here. And they ran out of ventilators because of the number of ICU patients who came in. Like most of the hospitals up here ran out of ventilators. They don't have good cooling protocols in place because they're not used to managing heat stroke. And so it really just pulled everyone's eyes onto this huge gap that we have in the ability to manage these things. And we're still not really talking about it despite the heat warning going out. Like, I got an email at work the other day talking about the World Cup and the possibility for a mass casualty incident with the World Cup starting up here, but no acknowledgement of like, oh, it's now going to be extra hot. A lot of these nursing facilities don't have cooling. We have a pretty old population where we are. And so that preparation and the thought process just doesn't exist in a lot of places still because we're not used to it. And we see this with a lot of different places. So a few years ago, there was that heat wave in Europe. A huge number of people died during that heat wave. But it's not just heat. So there's another thing that I think you and I think a lot about being out west is wildfire smoke. And wildfire smoke that impacts so many things. We think a lot about like asthma and COPD, but it also increases rates of heart attack and stroke and pregnancy complications. And so there's these far reaching effects of these different climate related events that we see these large increases in many different types of healthcare, of health issues. I do want to caveat this with we see the benefit of mitigating climate with positive health impacts also. During my fellowship, was doing some work in urban forestry and talking with urban foresters about tree planting. When we plant trees, it cools the area around the trees. It also improves the air quality. It mitigates flooding, and it can protect against all of those things that I was just mentioning: asthma attacks, COPD attacks, heart attacks, strokes, and then just exposure to green space. I'm sure that you feel this. Like, I feel so much more at peace, and like we see these huge mental health benefits from exposure to green space. And then another like quantified study, it actually just came out last week and I think is really cool. In China, they've had this really rapid transition to electric vehicles, hybrid vehicles, and hydrogen vehicles. And they were monitoring like the particulate matter release of PM2.5 is one of these markers of air pollution that we talk a lot about in climate medicine, specifically related to their transition from combustion vehicles to non-combustion vehicles. They saw a 24% decrease in PM2.5, which prevented about 262,000 deaths. And so we're seeing these things that obviously the intention of transitioning to electric vehicles is not saving human lives, right? We're not like, oh, everyone should drive an EV because we're going to save so-and-so's life down the street because they're not going to have the heart attack. But I think it's like a pretty good byproduct of the transition to green energy and green cars that we're seeing. And so we see that these two things, human health and climate change, are so intertwined, where the negative impacts of climate change lead to death and horrible things, but the positive things that we do in attempts at mitigation can actually be really positive for people too.
Definitely. I think these are some of the links that aren't fully spelled out to the public enough. For example, we think about the EVs and improving vehicles, but I don't think we think about this could save lives. Like, I hadn't fully made that connection with those big numbers until you just said it right now. And that's a really big deal.
Yeah. And I think in general, I think people like the idea of helping other people. And so when you're talking about like how can I do something? And it doesn't really have to be that big of a deal, right? You're like, the choice to buy a different car. If you're going to look at buying a car anyways, how do you make that decision? Maybe there's that little voice in the back of your mind that's like, oh, like maybe this could help, my neighborhood because I won't be emitting all of these horrible particulates from a combustion engine. And just, I think that the more we talk about it and the more we understand that our little decision can help other people, it makes those decisions a little bit easier.
Definitely. And those particulates aren't just affecting the lungs with, let's say, asthma and lung disease, but as you mentioned, also the heart, pregnancies, so many different things. I think that study from China, like all the data from China, needs to just be broadcast widely.
Yeah. Yeah. I
They
mean,
they
their
know something.
transition to green energy has been incredible. Like, they're producing more solar panels every day than like many other countries combined per year. Their transition has been really incredible. And it's the cost, the amount that things cost now has come down so much that it's now cheaper to buy solar than it is to do anything else.
Wow. Okay. I mean, I think we need to like take some lessons here. Let's take some notes.
Very much so.
I like that you're also, I mean, obviously, like we're talking about some negative things, but knowing the positive changes that humans can make that are actually real is also really important to think about, because I think that there's obviously a lot of room for improvement, but a lot of things that can actually make a true difference.
Yeah, and we're seeing this already, and I think that like that little piece of hope is so important. I feel like most of the headlines we get about climate change are like everything is horrible and the entire planet is on fire. But there's the people from IPCC who have designed all of the climate scenarios for the past couple of decades. This is something that I am surprised that I didn't see more about. It also came out a few weeks ago. RCP 8.5, which is worst case scenario projections, like no oversight or any policy enacted, and just like carry on with our current emissions from several years ago. By 2100, I think it was like a 5 or 6 degrees Celsius increase in global average temperatures, horrible across the board. That scenario is no longer plausible. They're like, this thing will not happen anymore because of all of these other things that have already happened. And a lot of that has to do with like green energy and no increase in coal production or coal usage. That to me is a huge deal. The fact that we've now completely mitigated the worst case scenario, we have a lot of work to do still. We have plenty of work to do. Like the couple of the other like moderate scenarios are not great. But the fact that we've completely avoided this worst case just by people doing the work, I think is so important to remember and gives me like a lot of hope to continue doing this kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. It's like we need to keep continuing it. And where does the US stand in relation to the rest of the world regarding this topic?
We were doing okay, and then the current administration has really pulled back a lot of the progress we'd been making. There were during Biden administration just huge amounts of incentive to do climate work, to put in green energy, to do all sorts of resilience work, and those have completely disappeared. And there has been this new focus on continuing to increase oil production. And while we are still in this transition from oil and gas and coal to green energy, we need them. We do. And I think that everyone can tell with the war, like with the increase in gas prices, like we still feel that. But we shouldn't be looking to increase it. We shouldn't be focusing on this as like our main energy source. Yes, we need it, but we should be focusing on how to decrease our reliance on it more than we currently are doing. And the politics behind the oil lobby and all this stuff are like really messy. If you look back into the 80s, I think it was Exxon. Exxon had climate scientists on their payroll who predicted the things that we've seen in the past 30 or 40 years. Like they knew that this was going to happen and they effectively hid all of this research and made it so that they could continue selling oil. And like we've known for decades, this is not new. This is not a surprise. This was all projected. And despite that, we have continued to rely on oil. And that has to do a lot with like the political power that the oil lobby has. And that's not something that we're going to get rid of overnight, right? These are hugely powerful companies with tons of money and their hands in everybody's pockets. But I think that understanding that we've known that for a long time and that they've continued to push this idea that we need oil is so important because then we understand that the people who are pushing this idea have a financial investment in it and not necessarily that the science to transition away isn't there, that the ability and the will to transition away isn't there. It's just that it has been hidden on purpose for a really long time.
Well, it seems we're in the season now where a lot of things that have been hidden on purpose for a long time are coming out. So I'm not completely shocked by what you're saying, even though I should be shocked, you know, but that is very interesting to think about too, the impact that these corporations have on legislation and the government. And so to that end, how can we work in that legislative space on the other side of this field, on the side of trying to help our planet and health of people?
Yeah, this is something that I have been doing more work in for the past year or so. It's still pretty new to me, and I'm still not super comfortable in the space. During fellowship, we went to DC, and with the Medical Society Consortium for Climate and Health, we met with a bunch of our legislators, and I was like terrified meeting with, I don't know, politicians. Like, we don't see eye to eye, I think. But it was a really good experience and like meeting with people and talking to them about different, we were there mostly talking about air quality, but like EPA regulations and this sort of stuff. And so I got like a little taste of it. And I think that working more in the space now it's actually been really helpful. And again, kind of like looking back to that idea of hope. So I've been working with Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility. And PSR is a national organization with state chapters throughout the country. For the Washington state legislative session this year, I have mostly been working in extreme heat. There's a handful of other task forces within PSR, and I'm not totally up with all the stuff that they've been doing. But for the extreme heat stuff, we worked with a couple of state reps and state senators to draft some bills and have them heard on the floor there's 3 that I worked on. One of them, I'll start with this one because this was the most exciting. So this one that this is gonna sound ridiculous, okay? So in Washington State, until this bill, if you were a renter, you could not install portable AC in your house. You could be evicted from your
What?
house if your landlord found out about it and your lease was written a certain way. Like, you could literally be kicked out of your house for, like, trying to protect yourself from a heat wave. And we're like, "Y'all, this is absurd," right? And so our bill, the Washington State budget is a disaster right now. So this was not asking for any money. This was not telling landlords that they had to install anything. It was literally like a tenant can purchase a portable AC unit and put it in their house, and it's okay. So we took this bill and, like, I helped write it and I testified in Congress for it. And some of the housing lobby was there. And girl, let me tell you about the housing lobby. They were like, okay, but what if they put in a window unit? Sometimes that voids our window warranty, voids the warranty. And I was just like, guys, people die. Like, people die if their house is too hot. And they were like, oh, I guess you're right. So we did get this bill passed. It passed the House and the Senate. And then Bob Ferguson signed it into law earlier this year, which was great. We were like, okay, thank goodness. Like, very baseline, people can cool their homes. Some of the other stuff that we're trying to do, we're working on writing a bill for a pilot program to get heat pumps installed in low income housing. And heat pumps are incredibly energy efficient, both heating and cooling units. There's permanent ones and there's portable ones. We knew that wasn't going to pass just because it was asking for money, but it's something that some of the counties are doing locally here, and Oregon has this great program that's doing it. And then the other bill that I was working on focuses on heat, like extreme heat response planning. And this is something that I am really excited to be working on. We also knew that this wasn't going to pass, but it's the first time that this idea has been introduced on a state level. And so a heat response plan is similar to, like, any other type of disaster planning, where you have this extreme event that you're looking at and you're like, how do we prepare for it? So it's the lead up to the response, ensuring that you have infrastructure for cooling, ensuring that there's some sort of early warning system in place, ensuring that you have the capacity to care for people who are impacted by it. And it takes into account, like, the public health level, it takes into account hospital level, and also relies a lot on community-based organizations to enact this. And some of the counties here already have them, so there's a precedent for it, and there's good examples. Like, Spokane has one. I mean, Spokane's like high desert, so they get much hotter in the summer than we do, like, on the western part of the state. And then I think Olympia or Thurston County has one. So Olympia is the state capital, and Thurston County is the surrounding county. So there is some work in this area already, but the idea with the bill was hopefully we're going to mandate that all counties had to design one. So now we're kind of taking that and working with folk more locally to see what that would look like for Seattle, and can we create an outline for other counties to do it. But there's, I mean, like, as far as legislation goes, like, this AC bill that we got passed, it's a tiny ask, right? It's literally just like, let people do something to protect themselves. And so I think sometimes when I was initially thinking about legislative action, it's like these big, slow moving bills that have all of these stipulations and all of these different people involved and a lot of work, and it takes a long time to get implemented. But I think that there's also this much smaller level thing that you can do. And while it's, like, kind of intimidating to go in and testify in person, it got a lot easier. And you realize that as these bills are being heard on the floor and they're having public comment, like, all sorts of people show up. There was one transportation bill that some guy who was, like, super into riding motorcycles came in to talk about, and he was just, like, talking about his motorcycles and why it was important for them to, like, consider motorcycles. Anyone can do this.
Yeah, people show up and comment.
Yeah. Yeah, and I kinda love that. And the other side of it that was really cool is we've had such positive engagement from the legislators that we've been working for, that really invested in doing the work and will, like, go to the mat for a lot of this. And so part of it is just, like, learning who you can partner with, and then bringing in the information that they don't know. Like, they're not physicians, right? They have no idea what the health impacts are, but if you can pull that information, if you can like bring examples of what happens to your patients if these things don't get fixed, they're really receptive and really interested in learning more and working on stuff.
Well, and I think that's the important thing that once people hear, oh, it actually affects real humans, like we are actually seeing more people come to the hospital, more deaths, more other issues, then it makes more sense. And so I think it's really important to be able to translate these complicated concepts into normal English with examples that everybody can understand. And I will say it's really important to think about the big picture, but also to get the low hanging fruit at the same time. Just my own parallels of doing stuff in the hospital and in our department and just with some of my work over the years. It's like you just get the small wins where you can, and then eventually those do build up into bigger wins.
Yeah.
And
And
you
I
just got to
I
stay
think
in the
just
game.
and like if people see the progress, they're more inclined to make bigger changes, which I think is also like what you're describing exactly right. Like you build up these small wins and then it gets easier, you build momentum and more people get invested.
Yeah. Well, and it also sounds like every part of the environment and climate does intersect with our daily work. And it's like whatever improvements we can make, the better. I mean, right now, our heat already started for the summer. And so we've already seen several people coming in with hyperthermia emergencies, which is usual for us, but definitely the number has gone up over the years. And I can't imagine how difficult it is for the areas where they've never dealt with that before. And then also, other things that overwhelm our systems, such as when fires happen. I mean, we're in the middle of fire season. And so we're all over California. We're already seeing it.
Yeah. I know it unfortunately will just keep getting worse.
Yeah. And I think we also think about heat a lot as, oh, well, it's only going to affect our patients that are working outside in the heat. And it turns out that's not the case at all. It's like, what is their indoor environment like? And we see these medications affecting them all the time. I mean, all the time. You see a little bit of dehydration, their kidneys get affected a little bit. They can't get rid of their medication, and then they get a little bit sick from it, sometimes a lot of bit sick.
Yeah. And we also see as climate changes, people get more violent.
Oh, yeah.
The hotter it is, the more violent injuries we see. Not only are we protecting people from their health conditions, but also trying to protect the community from violent interaction.
Study after study in trauma patients shows that really it's from May to August, basically Memorial Day to Labor Day are your highest rates of trauma injuries as a whole, but violent injuries in particular. And so that is not just Fresno, but it's everywhere. And so that is something important to think about.
Yeah.
Well, Gail, I did want to remind you that this is human school. And so, we're just humans trying to like learn things on this planet. So I just have to ask you, is there a lesson that you've learned recently or you feel like you're learning right now? Tell me everything.
I think a couple of things. First and foremost is going to be because, like, the lesson, especially when I was in fellowship and thinking about this all the time and working constantly with people who are much smarter than me and much more climatologically inclined than me, to see them look at what felt to me to be this really overwhelming thing and be like, no, we got this. We can do something. Like, I really had to like meet with people who are permafrost researchers who are like, yeah, I mean, all the permafrost is thawing, but I think we can do something about it. Like, it's wild to me to be able to look at that disaster and still hold on to this sense of hope and the sense that we can do something. If we continue to have this positive outlook and not completely give up, I think that there's so much that we can do. And the other thing that has been really cool, I think, in medicine in particular, and in a lot of fields in general, we get so narrowed in on what we do, right? Like medical residency, you're always around a bunch of people who are in healthcare. All you think about, all you talk about, all your friends do this, and everyone around you does this. And through the fellowship, I worked with a huge variety of people. I worked with Indigenous leaders, I worked with climatologists, lawyers, anthropologists. It was a super wide variety of expertise. And we're all trying to do the same thing, right? We're all like trying to make the climate better, and to be able to hear how they're doing things and what they're completely changing and refocus to what I felt were the priorities and the things that had the most resonance. I think it was just a really good reminder that, yes, it's really important to have a bunch of people around you doing the same thing as you were focusing on like one aspect of things. But to be able to reach out and move outside your comfort zone and read a bunch of papers about the boreal forest or whatever other topic you want to talk about or learn about, people are also super excited to talk about those things. It's, from an academic perspective, the most collaborative space I've ever been in my life. There's never this sense of protecting the research. It's like, oh, you're curious about this? Let me tell you everything, because we're going to move further together than we will in parallel and separately. I think that it's been such a cool experience, and I think in emergency medicine, we're always jack of all trades, but this has really broadened what that means to me. And to be able to talk about all these things with a bunch of different people has been so valuable. I went to an earth science conference during fellowship that was like when I was really deep into the permafrost thing. And I went to some permafrost lecture, and I went up to one of the researchers afterwards. They were looking at the microbiologic makeup of permafrost. And I was like, do we know anything about the pathogenicity of these microbes? So like, are we seeing any bacteria here that we know can cause human illness? And they were basically like, I've never thought about that, but that's a great question. So you're like, that's the first thing that we think about in medicine. For example, they found in Siberia that there was an anthrax outbreak that was linked to a reindeer that had been frozen in permafrost for like 100 years. And the permafrost thawed and then released anthrax into the community. And you're like, oh, great. So it's just, are we going to like send all this wild stuff into the air? But to be able to go up and be like, I see this thing that you're doing is really cool. How is this going to change how we think about something that I care about? And then to have them, instead of being like, no, that's a crazy question, but to sit there and be like, oh, this is something we absolutely need to keep discussing. How can we think about this? How can we partner on this and move forward together? Was a really cool moment to have.
That's beautiful. That's so awesome. Well, that's like a great place to end our episode for today. Thank you so much, Gayle, for coming on. You're the best.
Ooh, the self button.
All right, bye, everyone. Please like, subscribe, share, and download the podcast. And again, you can find us at Human School Podcast on Instagram. I'd like to thank Dr. Zach Effron for the theme music. And I'd just like to make a general disclaimer that any of the institutions I work for, including Community Regional Medical Center, UCSF, UCSF Fresno, and American Ambulance, have nothing to do with any of my thoughts or opinions, and so we'll kindly leave them out of this. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.